All right, welcome everybody. It's November 2nd. This is week 6 since EOS Independence Day. Today's another special edition. We've got ENF here. Steven's going to be giving us a peek into the ENF program management system. Before we get into that, we'll do our usual roundtable on status updates towards the next upgrade. I'll share my screen. We can take a peek at what we looked at last week. And then we can get started. So here we go. I think I'm sharing my entire desktop right now, aren't I? I'm going to stop that. Just share the window.
All you need to do is share your private keys. That's it.
There you go. All right. So as of last week, we got the update that we got is that we've got a LEAP 3.1.3 patch release, LEAP 3.2 RC2, CDT 3.1, system contract updates, and DUNE. How are we looking there, Steven?
Yeah, so the latest update is that we have released that patch release. Just dropped the link there, as well as RC2 for LEAP. I'll drop that link as well. We knocked that out yesterday afternoon. I think that we may still be on track for that CDT release this week. We've just had a couple of capacity constraints here and there, but everything's moving pretty smooth, like no big hiccups, just things running a little longer than expected. Really hopeful that this last RC that we've pushed out for 3.2 is our last one before we go final, but we'll just kind of wait and see on that one a week or so.
All right. We're up here. If anyone wants to have a peek, we'll include the links in the summary description and share that after the call. Thank you, Steven. Anything else on the software side of things to report?
I'd say everything's pretty much as previously stated. So no big rush on getting that system contract update out. And then in terms of the DUNE release, I think we're really just waiting for things to go final. We've got a few new people who are tackling a few small bugs there as well. So just seeing how all of that kind of merges together with our timeline.
Great. And then last week we had the technical discussion discussing Blocks.log files. The TLDR for that one is, yes, Blocks.log file splitting is needed, but no, not the way it was done in 2.1. So they captured all the kind of the very high level summary here. I think Stephen probably took some more detailed notes and added some features on the backlog coming out of this conversation. So I think it was a productive conversation. If you missed it and you want to watch the full recording, it's here. And like I said, today we are going to be talking about the program management system. And I remember you mentioned also, besides Blocks.log, was it ship node splitting? Something else you guys wanted to get, state history splitting.
Yeah, the ship is state history. So they're the two big monstrous files, or three monstrous files, but that's where all the big nasty storage gets eaten up and tries to get split up by infrastructure providers.
Okay. And if I don't believe we really got into that on the last call. It was really focused on the Blocks.log. So maybe if we've got some time at the end after the demo, we can jump into that. We'll see how it goes.
I think we did talk a little bit about it. I mean, one thing is it's not as consistent as the block logs, so it may not be as open to some of the other, distribution torrent type mechanisms, like that. That was one, key of it right at the very end. But the same kind of, mentality of it's monstrous. It had a little bit of trimming and pruning kind of built in, and maybe now, I don't know, but it might could be better. But it also needs to take into account, all the other, there's so many other features that tie to it. The P2P protocol one is maybe one of the next hot topics that maybe we should all technically hash out. Anyway, I'll sit back before Ross whacks me to shut up.
Stephen, are you going to go over what the coalition talked about? Because P2P will be covered in that. Are you showing just mostly the releases, or are you going to even go into like the coalition ranking and stuff, Stephen?
So my plan for today was I was going to kind of show the initiative backlog as a board and like the function. And I'm happy to double click on a few of those initiatives, such as P2P. I was kind of flexible about that approach, but really what I wanted to talk about was the processes by which the community can engage by both seeing what we're up to, but also providing commentary or requests.
Got it.
Great. All right. Well, I guess we can get into that then. I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll hand it over to you, Stephen.
Excellent. All right, and I'll look to share a couple of links along the way. These things should all be publicly visible, so please feel free to take a look at your leisure or bookmark. So first things first, thanks everybody for coming to join to learn about this process. I know it's not the most riveting thing, but your engagement is exactly why we're here, right? So a lot of the purpose of my role within product right now and the problems I'd like to solve is really the activation of the community to help us continue to get better and better requirements for each of these different initiatives that we're trying to tackle. A lot of the theme of where we've been at so far in our journey with the ENF has been around just sort of getting a couple of healthy releases out, getting a healthy process by which we digest this work and push it along. And now we're really stepping into that phase of testing these processes to really start prioritizing some of those bigger, meatier problems we want to be solving. So the first thing that I wanted to walk everyone through today is just how we kind of talk about initiatives in their current state, how we visualize them and use this board as that communication tool. The one thing that I'll really drive home here to start is that this is a very top-down view. There are details yet to be filled in, but you can see some of the early stages of how we're talking about where work is at, how we're prioritizing it, and when we're making decisions to kind of take that next step of effort in either really defining a possible solution or actually executing against it. So from there, I'll go ahead and just start talking about this board and what you can expect from it. So this is our initiative backlog, and initiative for us today is really just like a larger collection of work. It's not the equivalent of an epic per se, but it's really just like a big meaty problem that we want to solve. The underlying hierarchy that lives underneath it, we're still kind of negotiating and trying to feel out the functionality for this tool that we're using. But suffice it to say that like initiative is just a really broad term to talk about problems that we want to solve. While we're also looking at this board, I'll mention very quickly that we're using GitHub projects as our primary tool. We've made this selection just because it, of course, is kind of the most bare metal version of planning that you can find, and that we live directly in GitHub with our engineers. And all of these links that I'll be sharing today are fully accessible to anybody in terms of at least a read level permission. So moving on from there, this, of course, is a GitHub projects board. It's pretty typical looking Kanban board. But what you can see is that we have these individual cards that move across a number of these statuses all the way out to closing out a project. Most of what we'll focus on for today is kind of more what we'd consider the portfolio management side of things, where it's really around refining, developing those ideas and getting them in that queue towards execution. But I'll just walk through these statuses right quick, and then we can talk about how other people come into the play here. So first things first, opportunity is really just any identified opportunity. It can be a problem to solve. It may even be a known solution. Traditionally, from a product perspective, we want to be starting with user problems. However, we do have a lot of strong subject matter expertise in-house that have been able to advocate for certain initiatives that we'll tackle. The first real decision that we make as a product team is whether we want to further define these opportunities. And really what that amounts to is a one-page summary that's kind of effectively a product brief outlining some of the context around what the problem is, maybe some investigation of other ways that this problem has been solved elsewhere, as well as just some of the next steps that we need to take to further this down that pipe. So an example of that you can see by clicking into any of the issues that have made it to the opportunity review phase or later as of late. I say that just because this process is quite new, so not all issues further on in these statuses have these briefs defined just yet, but you can see here that we're really trying to flesh out why we're trying to solve this problem, some context around what the current lay of the land is, and then starting to dig into the solution and our assumptions around that if we have them at that time. So you can see here, we find these opportunities, the way that we'll get those inputs, I'll touch on in just a moment. We choose to define those opportunities and then put them in a review stage where we can review internally with our stakeholders to actually decide to spend more time and effort, AKA money, on designing actual solutions here. It's at this time that I'll back up and say that I've been talking a lot about this from an internal process perspective. However, there are overlapping bodies of work that kind of move through the ENF or the ENF touches. And one of those examples that came up in discussion earlier, even on this call, is coalition priorities. You can see here that we do have an early version of just labeling coalition priorities and identifying those that we have RFPs out for. These will move through these same statuses. However, the actual steps involved are a little bit different. So instead of doing a actual product brief in those scenarios, instead, typically an RFP will be authored, which is that request for proposal that outside parties can bid on. But of course, you can see some of the parallels through these first few stages. So effectively speaking, there's a decision point here at that solution design stage where we decide, whether we're going to invest in doing that. Upon the completion of those designs, we actually have a review stage and then decide from there internally whether we wish to break it down and execute against that work. Where all of that work goes is varied, and I would suggest that Jeff is better at communicating about some of those external parties that we feed some of these items out to. But really the focus for today is talking about getting these ideas and opportunities in the pipe from the community, working to define those opportunities enough to review them and decide whether we want to invest time in solving these in a more sophisticated way. So that's kind of the high level of how you can kind of see where we're at. A little further down, you can see some other stages that I think are less critical for today's discussion, but you can, of course, imagine that after we've designed a solution, it's in review, we decide to break down that work and resource it for an actual estimated plan. This will vary a great deal based off, again, whether it's an external project or an internal one, since we primarily execute in agile methodologies internally, but milestone-based externally. Project development, of course, just communicates these initiatives that are already in process. And then user acceptance. These are just the things that are going out in 3.2 right now before we actually transition into our internal team for further monitoring. So again, these further steps, I think, are a little bit less critical for this stage that we're at in the discussion and the purpose of today's meeting. They're, of course, critical for the ENF's operations and actually validating that the things that we're building are a success, and also identifying some of those future opportunities to go back into the pipe. So I'll pause here since I just talked a whole lot about a bunch of statuses, and I know boards aren't the most engaging thing. What kind of questions might anyone have at this point?
Hi, Steve. It's Russ. How do the opportunities ultimately end up in column number 1? How do they get there?
That's an excellent question, and I'm happy to segue there. There's a couple of different avenues by which this can take place. One is honestly beating me over the head. So I'm the only product person right now. We have product influences within this org, and we will be growing the team in time. But you'll see that, for example, your team has reminded me a bit of KV updates. And wouldn't you know, we're finally getting into that opportunity definition to hopefully prioritize and execute against some of that work. I think other ways that you can do it are, of course, providing input into any of our repos, outlining some of the issues that you may encounter at a smaller level. However, the recommended process right now for how you can actually submit proposal requests, I'll transition to right now. So I'm delinquent on a little bit of documentation on this front for how best to accomplish this, but inside of the EOS Network Foundation product repository, I'll go ahead and send a link for that as well. Find the chat. What you can see here is there's basically just, a folder or subdirectory structure here outlining much of the taxonomy in support of LEAP and some of the other ENF functions. Within each of these spaces, we've been starting to define a little bit of the scope of existing work, but also in subfolders starting to submit proposals. And the way that these proposals are taking place right now is still kind of in process, but the way that it looks today is basically via pull request. And you can see here we have a number of outstanding PRs that we need to discuss with the team, but the process today is basically you go into the repo, you assess whether or not the existing taxonomy supports where your proposal would live. If not, part of your PR would include that folder structure to introduce that folder to submit your proposal in effectively. And then you really just try to best define what it is that you're trying to request. We do need to generate a clear template for this, and that's on the to-do list. But you can see inside of each of these that they involve these MD files that are effectively the proposal that was made. And what's happening here is that this is generating a backlog of larger proposals that we seek to review. And the way that this is taking place right now is I'll typically communicate with the person who has submitted the PR to assess who all they think needs to be involved in that discussion. And then I'll grab some people from the internal team to kind of host and discuss this, try to outline some kind of next steps around this, or whether we decide to not do it at that time. It's still kind of early days here, and you can see that there's a few early symptoms showing that we can stand to improve the process, just in that some of these submissions have taken a little longer than we'd like. But that's all part of the process, right? We're starting to map each of these stages and assess whether things are kind of sitting in one status too long so that we can make the adjustments we need. And just to brag again about Jeff right quick, something that his team is doing, I won't show you any real details of it, but the level of rigor at which we're seeking to actually document the processes through each of the various entities and the actual deliverables and activities involved. We have a great deal of rigor that we're trying to introduce here, so we can really track and improve how we're processing these requests and how we're actually getting work to a refined state so that it's actionable and being delivered.
Stephen, one of the other things is not everybody has a proposal. They just have a bug, or they have a comment on something, or they want to see a minor thing fixed or a minor thing upgraded. We would use issues for that, right? And anyone in the community can open an issue, and you also track through those issues and determine if those need to be moved into a full-on pull request, et cetera.
That's exactly right. So I'll pivot over there right quick and share a couple more links. So as at least everyone on this call is likely aware, the ENF operates out of two primary organizations right now. One of those is the EOS Network Foundation org. The other one is the Antelope IO org. Antelope IO, of course, is, LEAP, CDT, DUNE. The primary focus of EOS Network Foundation from the scope of this discussion today is that product repo, as well as the EOS system contracts repo, just because that's where it naturally belongs within how these different bodies of work are managed. But suffice it to say that anytime somebody encounters an issue, they should feel empowered to basically just create an issue for us. The easiest way to do that, just so that you can see, is probably starting with whatever repo you believe the issue to be associated with. We can just start here with Leap, for example, but it's as easy as literally clicking new issue and submitting it. When this issue is created, it gets moved into one of our actual like Scrum team backlogs, where we're actually triaging those issues, prioritizing them, and committing to them in sprints. And that's where I'll transition from here, which is I'll quickly show you the EOS Network Foundation one. You can see here it's very basic in that it's really just sprint backlog and a standard backlog that we move those commitments into. We, of course, have our active sprint view that any of you can view. I forgot to share this link, so let me go ahead and send this to you. So there's that. So one flaw right now that we're working through, which isn't the end of the world, is that since we're split between these two orgs, we're balancing between two boards. Obviously, that is a minor challenge, but it's something that we're working through. But I'll flash over to the second board, which is a little bit larger body of work that we're tackling, since it's a greater number of repos and the primary areas where our code base is being updated. You can see again that we have our planned sprint that's taking place right now and wrapping this week. And we'll be performing another sprint planning ceremony against these triaged issues. Just to kind of close out the loop on how that process takes place, when an issue is submitted, we've developed GitHub actions that effectively move that issue directly into this project, and it will assign a triage label to it. We have a few triage leads that are technical subject matter experts that are then assigning secondary labels to it, such as whether the issue is actionable, requires discussion, may need more info, such as a preliminary spike or more info from the requester, and the nature of the request, whether it's a feature request, an enhancement to something that's already out there, whether it's just a straight up bug, a documentation gap. And from there, just since I'm explaining everything about this board, the looks good to me label basically is our form of ready, since there's a few different entities that are pulling from this backlog. That actually kind of brings us to an even further flung goal of ours in time, which is that, further community engagement, as long as, they're following the same standards and rules that our core team does, we want to further empower. And anytime that we identify work as actionable, we, of course, would love to, in the future, entertain the opportunity for more engagement and contribution to the code base. This has been a little bit of something that's fallen on the back burner, since it's been a little bit more about stabilizing the internal operations, of which we've been quite successful. But that's obviously like the evolution, right? As we continue to reach back out to the community, it's the activation of these requests, ideas, the bugs that you run into, but eventually empowering the engineers to directly contribute. So I hope that kind of paints a picture of how we sort of manage the work internally. Again, you can click in and see like what we're tackling this sprint, what we've already accomplished. And we'll be planning again this Thursday, where you can again see what we're planning to do the next 2 weeks.
Stephen, you should come work on some of our projects. This is so nice and organized. I'm loving it.
So it's early days, but yeah, it's exciting stuff. And I'm just really happy with how the tools come together and the appetite of the team to be flexible. It wouldn't be possible without the contributions of the core engineering team, folks from OCI like Kevin, who've been just super valuable in helping triage and tackle the bugs that come through. It's early days still, but we want to show this progress to you guys, and we want to get you guys engaged, providing feedback so that we can continue to be more transparent in our work, but also like tackle the right things.
So Stephen, I have a question, and I totally don't want to put you on the spot. This is obviously agile kind of based. Once the rubber hits the road, we progress through doing a sprint, delivering on some kind of short-term outcome. How are we tracking the costs associated with each one of those sprints to like an outcome. I mean, at the beginning, you were saying that it's more like a sort of milestone based. I'm assuming there would have been a fixed cost associated to each one of those milestones. How are you actually manage against that? I mean, for myself, coming into a developer world in the last 6 years or so, it's one thing I did notice that quickly spirals, when the developers run amok, just doing extra features and how they want to do things.
Yeah, so I'm going to give you kind of a wishy-washy answer here to start, which is that we're really working on defining a number of processes around associating those costs appropriately. And it's not necessarily for me to say how that will be communicated and relayed. At the end of the day, I'm going to interoperate with it and agree to it and adhere to it. But a lot of where I've led in within my role, which I can speak on behalf of, has been much more about instilling those agile principles to help drive accountability and self-inspect so that we're never running too long on any given thing. But there's actually still a bunch of natural evolutions, even within how we're running iterations, that we need to just better assess the cost that's taking place here. One such example is that a next evolutionary step that I'd like to introduce for too long is a story pointing convention. Right now, it's much more gut feeling around what we feel we can tackle, and we've been quite successful. But again, it's just those baby steps to ratchet on each piece of the process along the way, and that's a very natural next evolution here. And kind of meeting from the other side, once we get some of those rolling velocities, if you will, we'll be able to start tying that back more clearly towards cost.
Right. And the other thing is, coming from Jeff's side of the house, we need to do longer range planning. So we plan on generally having a March, April release and an August, September release each year. And so getting the things that are going to be in that March, April release require us to do a little bit long range planning. Will this item fit in that release or not? And we have to get those features prioritized into the release first. And that leaves a lot of this, whether it's cleanup or bug fixing or other stuff, will have to go into a budgeted allocation. So whether we budget 15%, 25% to that, there'll be a continual list of rotating priorities, which will be done more in this sprint fashion. And while we may still track in a sprint the longer range priorities, and that's just something we're still evolving into, is how are we getting the plan of what's fitting into the March, April release put in the bucket first. And we just have not completed that. One thing we're not discussing here is many of our engineers are very heavily working on the Trust EVM project as well. And you don't see that on these boards. And that has been kind of strangling a lot of the throughput here. But that's managed in a different process than even this process. So we have to take all those things into account, and there will be changes with respect to that coming.
I know Kevin joked in one of the channels, or I don't know if it was a joke, but it was all about, hey, you can actually put a pull request and somebody may actually have a look at it. We could have an outcome. All these results, this is unfamiliar territory for us.
Yeah. And that
one thing I'd like to add is that we just separate the idea of the agile mindset versus agile methodologies. They're distinct things. You can have an agile mindset, but not necessarily always be using sprints, right? Because the agile mindset really is, you guys know, it's like being willing to challenge and improve everything in small increments, et cetera, right? And if you kind of look at his initiation board, the columns that are actually running sprints, like that's actually further to the right. Like all this other stuff is like, it might not even apply to smaller businesses. Like if you're like, Michael, I was thinking about you developing your app, right? There's no way a small group of like 3 people would want to do this because there's communication and stuff. But to increase the throughput of ENF, just think about, we need our executives to be steering like everything that we do. And we're going to, we're already, quite frankly, past the point where Eve can see like every little thing. We're going to quickly get to the point where we need to be packaging all these requests in a way that Ted and Eve and others can digest them much more quickly and then tell us, okay, go and do a real estimate on this. Because you guys also know running estimates costs a lot of money, right? That's a lot of time to come up with like a detail like, oh, this will take us like X number of weeks. And we don't want to do that for everything. We only want to do that for the stuff the executives say, yeah, we think this aligns with, our strategic plan. And so there's a couple things in here that we've added in complexity where the opportunity is getting to that kind of one page. We call it a ROM. It's a rough order of magnitude estimate, where we're saying, look, this could be plus or minus 25%. That's a horrible estimate to like buy something, but it's at least good enough for our executives to go, all right, it's this size of box. If they say move forward, then the next group is for us to take just the approved ones to the point where we can say, all right, who's going to build it? How long is it going to take? And most importantly, what's it going to cost? And then we can start sequencing stuff. So I hope some of you didn't look at this and go, this would be insanely crazy if we took this on, right? You need to have.
No, I didn't think that. I didn't think that at all. I thought it was very, very structured and very organized, and I appreciated that. It was more like, I didn't want to put anyone on the spot. It's more like a question. It's just like, hey, we're going to run some agile. We're going to be super maneuverable to better add features and do stuff. But how are we going to track that against ultimate goals and costs? That's all. I get it.
It won't be purely agile for the way we do our major releases, our biannual major releases. Those will be planned events. And we may run weekly updates and statuses and all that, but we'll have front-end loaded the major features in the release, and the agile stuff will be mostly the cleanup of stuff that's fluxing through at a predetermined budget level.
Yeah, let me share one other thing about this initiative backlog, and really just keep thinking in your mind, everybody, about how this can be a clearer and more helpful communication tool for you. Of course, considering the feature limitations within GitHub projects, but there's a couple other dimensions I've been trying to play with here to talk about what we're doing and when. And one example of this is the field of milestone. Keep in mind that this is, again, the product repo for the EOS Network Foundation. So this isn't an actual LEAP milestone, but we have these kind of abstracted values that are meant to just kind of be at parity with what you'd understand the LEAP milestones to be, as well as this kind of independent concept, which is meant to communicate. This is something that we estimate happening along this timeline, but not dependent upon those 3.2 repos. Again, kind of top down, this is meant to communicate. It's not something that we're writing scripts against or anything. So it's kind of a play thing. But you can see here what we're trying to bucket and estimate as components of this next release. And while this isn't set in stone, this is the direction that we're leaning towards. You can see also kind of what we know is going on independent of this, that's kind of dropping at similar timelines. And of course, there's still flaws in this, like obviously IBC needs to be broken down into more milestones here to better communicate the accuracy there. But you get some of the idea of what's going on here. If you want to see what's on our mind or things that we haven't really chosen to assign a milestone yet, these are all ways to start looking at what we're thinking. The other thing that I'll share right quick, which is an even further abstraction, but since I'm the product person, I'll do my product thing and say we also have a now, next, later way that I'm trying to start talking about things. And my nows are things that may not even be things that we've gotten very far along the pipe. There's a lot of stuff that's a now that's in development, obviously, but some things that are now are the opportunities that we need to define. And what this is meant to communicate is that there are some things that aren't quite on my radar yet, but this, for example, very much is on my radar. So it is a now item. And you can also see just some of the things that we're kind of trying to make decisions to slide out a little bit later so that we're at least driving some degree of focus. And it's not a perfect view, right? But it's something that starts giving you the idea of what's on our mind, what we're trying to address. And over time, you'll find that these details will really fill themselves in. I hope that just kind of gives a little bit more color.
Working out of two organizations, are you guys prioritizing across them? And how do you do that given the limitations of the GitHub projects? And from what I know, not having that cross-organization view.
So you want me to answer this, Stephen? Because it's really resourcing, right?
Yeah, I think that's it. I'll say one other quick thing, which is just that for the most part, the stuff that's in the EOS Network Foundation org from this side of the house's experience, it's not been that large of a scope of work. So it's been a little bit of a challenge, but it's not been like remarkably challenging. I'll let Jeff give the answer of how we're actually going to be solving this problem like longer term though.
Yeah, because you can see like even this view right here where he's got the coalition tag. What Antelope's doing, right? That's the priority for all of the chains, which we influence, but that doesn't lock us into, stone. We want to try to keep aligned with it. So in some cases, if our resources are the ones that are working on it, REG on instant finality is a good example of that. Stephen has pulled those items into our organization's backlog. So we kind of consider this, what we're looking at, like our source of truth, and the coalition backlog heavily influences it. But then when we get to the resourcing step, like you saw the number of phases, there is one later, like this is after Eve and Ted and the executives approve something, meaning it's got enough detail, we're willing to spend money on it, like, more significant money. That's when we then start the question of, okay, who can do this? In some cases, it's going to be like an external party, and it's not even ENF, right? In which case, we no longer care. We treat it like a third party, you get what I'm saying there. But if it is internal, that's when we have to now start adjusting. Okay, if this like instant finality is a predictive / waterfall type project because it's built on milestones, right? And Agile doesn't play nicely with fixed milestone dates. What we do is we reduce the capacity or the velocity, you would say in Agile, for all of the people being pulled off of our normal, Agile sprints, saying, okay, REG is going to spend X% of time on these waterfall projects. So, otherwise the rest of his time is in the Agile methodology. Is that clear as mud?
Well, I think you answered parts of the question, and I think that part of it was because of the terminology of GitHub org versus Antelope Coalition versus ENF org. So I think absolutely like the capacity calculation is how we'll do this. And Jeff is 100% correct about that. The coalition priorities kind of influence and play into the initiative backlog. I think Daniel's question was more specifically about the split between what we're calling our team backlog versus the ENF engineering backlog. These names are very inaccurate compared to everything else going on in this meeting. So apologies for that. But the Antelope IO org versus the EOS Network Foundation org. Was that your question, Daniel?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think answer was, Jeff's answer was also super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was super valuable information. And it is kind of how we're even calculating impacts of like EVM, for example, is something that we need to accommodate for and its impact on our throughput. What I would say here, though, is that a lot of like the research and I would say any of the EOS system contract stuff is falling inside of this one org, and it's not a large scope of work. So it's not been like super impactful against us having like the critical mass largely living inside of this backlog. It's absolutely imperfect still. And I think a future goal of mine is kind of taking it full circle to Jeff's statement is leveraging GitHub APIs in these estimates to actually just cumulatively sum the level of effort being expelled across those two items. But we're actually doing like sprint planning commitments to both of these backlogs simultaneously in the same meeting. So at least like that key decision of the commitment, that prioritization is being kept in check basically by like us as a team.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah. But if I could wave a magic wand and fix that, man, I definitely would, because one backlog is just a better life. But just to kind of follow up on that, also, I think one of our goals remains just being really accessible to the community. So not requiring any sort of like additional tech is a win for us, because I do think that the way that you guys have things running with like Pomelo and stuff absolutely adds value, having additional plugins and stuff.
Yeah, ZenHub gives you that shared backlog, but I think what you guys are doing doesn't make sense because it's public and there's a lot of trade-offs between switching to ZenHub and something like this. I'm looking for opportunities to actually move back. That's why I asked the question.
Well, one of the things we've found is that, all the coalition members are on GitHub and they're using GitHub for all of their internal work for their chains. And this was the one public tool that they all knew and that they all didn't have to buy, another subscription, et cetera. And they needed access to it anyway, because they need access to, the source code or the documentation repos, et cetera. So this became the place where, they can look at the projects, et cetera, without, again, adding ZenHub on top of it, et cetera. And we also felt it was a really good way to keep the engineers engaged along with program management and product management, because obviously the engineers live in GitHub all day. And so by just adding, some directory structures like the products directory and, saying all documentation would live in GitHub and that everything would be an issue in a PR, it really engaged the engineers in a way that, helped both product and program management, have a better dialogue with them. And I think that was kind of the main goal. We had to be public because we're crossing 4 different chains across the coalition. And we wanted to keep, the engineers deeply engaged in the program and product management works, life cycle and workflow.
Any other questions? So the only thing that I'll maybe ask of each of you is just think about questions you have about anything once you've poked around a little bit. It can even be asking for more details on a given issue. The one caveat I'll put up is that, like, obviously, if we've not written the opportunities definition, like we're working on it, and that's why it doesn't have the details yet. But even just documentation that you feel like there may be gaps for, that would be helpful for you to better engage here. I want to start getting a little bit more of that in place, especially because I'm happy to announce that the product team will be growing in size slightly over time. So we'll be able to reach further and do more than what you've kind of seen me doing, like juggling a bunch of plates. Like the level of rigor around this is only going to improve. And a lot of that's going to happen through connecting with the community and getting the necessary feedback to improve the way that, like, reduce the friction in which people can engage with this, but also just like better escalate and provide visibility to their problems, which, it's relationship building, but also refining these processes. Well, cool. Any other questions?
Nice one, Stephen. Appreciate that.
Okie dokie. Well, I will start working on a few things that are in support of this from a documentation perspective, and I may just filter that through some of the existing channels. But thanks again, everybody, for your time. And I guess I'll stop sharing my screen for now. Actually, one other thing that just since I've got a talking point here, one other place where you can see what we're up to that's meant to kind of communicate the same things as what's going on here, but at a different level of fidelity, is our roadmap artifact. So this is something that's updated every month. This one is going to be updated by the end of this week for this month. But you can see inside of the eosnetwork.com technology page, it's a bit buried right now. And I think that we'll be kind of reinvestigating how we can better provide visibility here, but really interested in feedback around whether people have clear understandings about where we're headed and what we're up to, because we're doing a whole lot of stuff. And we want to make sure that people are really easily connected and plugged into what we're doing so that they want to engage with us, that they want to ask questions or ask for the things that have been problems for them in the past. So
that is an incredible diagram. Are we happy to draw some attention to it?
Yeah, feel free. I noticed that the text replace, of course, introduced a typo while I'm here on the call, which is frustrating, but that's supposed to just be consolidated to RC so it doesn't run over. But yeah, eyeballs on this is great. It'll be updated again by the end of this week. It's just a few more pixel nudges away. And I could probably even share the link for that inside of Figma if you guys wanted, but I don't assume you guys want to live inside of Figma.
Just share the link on the website, Stephen. Don't share the Figma link.
Yeah, I dropped that already in the chat for anyone who wants to dig in. And again, I'll add all of these links into the summary and share it more broadly.
Yeah, this is the goal of this item is to be updated every month. And we actually started this the month I started. So we actually started drawing this and updating it. Stephen's taken it over right after he came on board and improved it into Figma. It's also in Korean and Chinese. If you flip to the Korean or Chinese pages, Stephen has pioneered an automated translation to those languages, which is pretty phenomenal. And that's why you saw the little hiccup he had there. It's in the tool that does the automatic translation. But I mean, I think this is probably a first of its kind, a company that's updating its roadmap monthly and updating it in Korean and Chinese simultaneously each month. I think that's just phenomenal that Stephen has driven this thing to yet another level, trying to provide clarity. On another similar note, I'm going to talk to Jeff a little more this afternoon, but maybe in a following meeting, Jeff will present some of the coalition stuff, which, is nice to see what their priorities are and what they're working on. And, I want to have a conversation with Jeff before I explain all of that to all of you. But I think Jeff will have I think will be a very interesting presentation, probably quite a bit shorter than Stephen's because there's not as much data from the coalition. But the goal of the coalition is to be as transparent as possible as to what they're doing, what their priorities are. And Jeff runs that on a weekly basis. And if you guys are open to it and Jeff has the time, I think it would be good for him. It's probably no more than 5 minutes. He'll be happy to show all that to you in maybe a week or two if Jeff's available.
One more fun thing, just for laughs or maybe pulling some heartstrings of the internal people. Just wanted to show you guys a quick progression of where we've gone with the development of our roadmap just in these last, 6-7 months. Just the level of integrity that we've been able to kind of scale up towards. Of course, the Zoom view here I broke, but you can see pretty cool just to see it live in action.
Want to humiliate their boss in a public forum like that, Stephen?
I didn't say who made the first one.
If you go back to the start of that, Stephen, go back to the very beginning.
Oh, sure.
So the when you go right to these first ones, these were being done in Google Slides. This is probably even missing because I pretty soon had a date in the lower right corner. This was the beginning of it. Yeah, you can see, look here, as of February 22nd, I started on January 31st. So basically started in February. We started publishing these, but we didn't have the website yet. We didn't even have a website to push these to because the website hadn't actually been developed correctly. So we were internally doing this. As soon as I hired Stephen, he kind of took it over. So these were all drawn by hand by me, in one of my earliest incarnations of my job. And, it's, while the format is improved dramatically when it went to Figma, we had a professional organization do it. And then Stephen even took the Figma to a much further level. I think is this the Figma, or the Figma actually changes a little bit, right?
Yeah, so this is the first iteration of Figma that that agency did, and then you can just see kind of making it a little bit more legible, introducing a different legend style. Again, the zoom's broken on this view for whatever reason, but then eventually just building up the legibility for the most part.
But I will tell you what I think is the most important thing to come of this little exercise isn't the formatting. You can witness the throughput of the community is like exploding, and that's really what we want, right? I mean, if we're gonna start grabbing market share from competing blockchain communities, we all collectively need to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. So that's what I see when I watch that, Stephen, is wow, because this isn't just ENF. Like most, if not all of you, you're all embedded in different line items here, right? I mean, I know Denis, you and I worked a lot on Yield Plus and others, and there's
smart contracts.
Yep, secure smart contracts, all that kind of stuff, right? I mean, this kind of represents all of us, which is, I just think, phenomenally cool.
Agree. And transparency, I mean, that's the goal. And so when Jeff presents in a week or two, you'll see even further transparency of what's going on at the really lowest levels of the coalition. The coalition publishes all of their weekly calls, not that everyone wants to watch another video. Some people do watch those videos, but so you can watch what they're deciding and how they had their conversations, and soon all those project boards will be live as well. And I think those are done tremendously. Jeff started out with, he inherited a Miro board, and he's put them into GitHub projects as well. And I just think they're a lot easier to view and look at. And we'll show you that in a week or two whenever Jeff's available. And Jeff and Daniel, if you two can arrange that would be great. Again, it'll be 5 minutes. It won't be, a good 45-minute presentation. It's 5 minutes.
Yeah, happy to add that to the agenda. I found today's super, super valuable. Thank you, Stephen, for sharing. And yeah, looking forward to seeing more of this type of thing. So yeah, happy to add to the agenda. Speaking of the agenda, anything that we want, anything special for next week, or are we go back to our shorter regular update? Or is there anything in particular that you guys are looking for feedback on that we want to dig into?
Stephen, any feedback items? I don't think we have any right now, right?
I don't think specifically for this group. We will be scheduling some meetings around some of those PRs that I mentioned inside of the product repo. So I guess for those who are interested, you can take a look at those PRs. And if you do find yourself invested in that topic, I'm happy to send you an optional invite to perhaps join in on the conversation.
Jeff, would you be available next week for a 5-minute overview of the coalition stuff? Okay, yeah, great. Absolutely. So maybe add that, Daniel.
Sure. Yep, same time.
One thing that I forgot, the group where you post these videos, the minutes, Daniel, can you add Bart to that group as well, please?
Yeah, happy to.
Thank you.
I would say that it'd be nice to have a slot to discuss some of the in-depth technical nature of some of those topics. I know you said individual PRs may spin off or whatever, but like, for instance, the P2P rewrite, RFP, and all of that. I know Matthew responded to it in some of the channels as well, but it's a great piece, but it's not what the people on this phone call are really talking about. As part of it, but it's
Why
different.
Don't we do that then? Why don't you all, if you have items you would like to go deeper in, send Stephen a note and Daniel, and Stephen and Daniel can work to get that as a part of the agenda for a following week. Kevin Hefner knows the P2P piece very well. They've helped us write the RFP. Stephen and Jeff know it very well. I'm reasonably knowledgeable of it myself. So, I think the people on this call could have a very good discussion. I think you'd be pretty happy with the outcome of that. Kevin, if Jonathan Jisak would be willing, it would be nice if he might be willing to join for the day that hits the agenda. Would anyone else in the call, Ross or Matthew or Corbin, would you all be interested in hearing more about P2P? Maybe we add that on to the agenda for next week.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Would that be okay? So Kevin, would you mind asking Jonathan if we add it next week? And Stephen, you okay with that?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Let's put it.
I'm going to keep
Jeff's
pushing
presentation because Jeff will take literally 5 minutes. This could take the rest of the hour.
I'm going to keep pushing to kind of have this collective,
love it.
Technical. It's awesome to have great processes and submissions and all of that. And obviously you can't fix what isn't, properly in the pipeline, but so much gets lost, once it goes through all of that.
Yep.
That peer-to-peer RFP, that was an interesting, all of us read it and we're like, oh, yeah, that's part of it, but not at all what we were talking about. None of the people on this phone call really care about that feature of it, although it is very critical.
You mean the revised one or the original one? The original one had two parts to it. Are you talking about the revised one, which is now done? Well, we haven't issued the revised one, right, Stephen?
I don't know. That was just to make sure. I can tell you this is what a lot of us read as one of the RFPs, which, whatever. It's part of it, but
we weren't paying attention. It just got dropped in one of the wax channels.
We were paying attention.
That's probably the revised one then. That's the revised one, which has it's cut in half. We can explain all that. We can go through that whole history. The more we can engage with all of you and get feedback, the better.
That'll be great.
So let me take that one step further, please, Michael. Please look at that backlog of ideas that, the PRs that are being reviewed that Stephen talked about. And if there's one you have, more interest than the other, maybe the following week we decide we'll have a discussion on that or something. And we can always, we won't be inviting Areg because it's too early in the morning, but it's not a big deal to get Matt and Bucky on the call. My hope is Bart will start to attend these as well. This is a really good engagement portion of the community, so we can have some of those discussions. And then the more you do that, maybe more people will start to join. It's interesting. I'm glad to see Ross and Corbin here. Maybe last week's call made them feel left out or something, and they said,
I felt left out. Yeah, I felt left out.
So maybe doing a little more of this will keep growing to more people saying, I want to be on that call as well, because there's something in there that I might be able to contribute or at least get my stake heard. So please do read through those PRs and see if there's an agenda item for even the next week afterwards.
Yeah, and a lot of us do. I was going to say Wax puts it out there, because their opinion is, I don't know, what we have our few things that they have, but then the BPs are the ones that are screaming. And of course, Wax is the one that stresses things pretty heavily. So it's the same opinions and the same, you're coming in from multiple angles, but it's all, these are strong Wax. BPs.
We publish them as well. Like this is the one you read is a revised version of the original published RFP. But the original RFP must have missed all of you guys. You guys weren't aware.
Well, there's a lot of content out there, and sometimes if it isn't put in front of you, hey, please, can you read this? Then you just don't do it.
I agree.
And I can be honest. The list that we got a condensed list, from Wax that they were reaching out to the BPs saying, hey, you guys care, y'all are in tune with it. Tell us what you want us to say, right? Yeah. And we went through it, and it was 55, 60 different initiatives. Many of which are way beyond my pleb status, but we commented on a few and, the technical side, obviously, but your diagram did a great job. Those lines keep going and spreading out and multiplying. And all of a sudden there's this monstrosity of there's a lot going on. So it kind of gets lost in the minutia.
Off the back of that, there's just one thing I want to mention in this call. I had never seen this chart that you made, this real-time chart, Stephen. And I think that you put it in a way that it's consumable for more than just somebody that's involved in the project. And I'm sure somebody might have already spoken to marketing, but we need to get this kind of information in front of marketing. So whenever they're pushing.
Are you referring to the roadmap?
Yeah, yes, the roadmap.
Marketing.
I know, but I know, but I didn't see any announcement. Hey,
is it on Twitter?
Things are going. The new
on Twitter.
Things are rocking and things are happening.
I mean, I'd actually, Stephen, I'd like you to tweet out the roadmap each time now. Seriously.
I'm going to
sorry, homie.
This one.
My bad.
No, I think that's a good point. The issue is from the day we launched the website, it's been on the now. The thing that I'm not completely in love with, and again, I don't own the website. I did help get it launched, but it's the very bottom of the technology page. And getting to the technology page, you have to click on the core pillars to get the technology drop down to get the technology page, in which you have to scroll all the way to the bottom to see the roadmap. And if I were the king, and I'm not, and it's not that Eve didn't want this, I would have made a roadmap, button right in the nav, so you could go click roadmap and see it. Right, for all of you, for our tech audience, you guys love that. You're like, yeah, roadmap, that's what I want to see.
I want to go to the next level. The fact that you go to a website and have to go to a page and scroll anywhere and click any button. I'm talking about having this in part of the tweets, having it as part of the conversations. And like I said, Stephen, it's very consumable now. You can see it. It's not just like a Kanban thing. You can see what's going on. Yeah,
it's very real.
A GIF of that going from the iterations of the roadmap, I think, would be a cool Twitter content.
That is a winner. That would be an absolute. You know what you just showed?
Look at the throughput of this community expanding over time.
You remember the EOS Authority? They did the replay of years of BP rank adjustments, right? It was like I don't know, 60-second video, something like that. Yeah.
Very cool.
Stephen, you played me a GIF with your left click.
Yeah.
Make that into a GIF. That'll be awesome. Look how we look. Not only is it getting more and more detail, but it's getting more and more organized. And looks better and better and better.
I actually have some recordings on my local of me experimenting with that as a visual. Jeff and I are actually chatting about that offline as well.
That'll get people excited because you know what? Even if they don't read any of it, they just see, look how pretty that chart is. Look how things are happening. Guys are building.
Shows throughput and it shows the energy. I mean, in the beginning, we were making that roadmap and there were no engineers on the team, believe it or not. The roadmap, the team was me and Eve and Zach and Brandon. That was it when I made the first roadmap. And, then Jeff and then eventually engineers. So, I mean, we were like a cat with a very fat tail in the beginning.
And you need the slide before the road is like just a desert, empty.
Yeah,
just 4 quarters with nothing in it.
Yeah, I was going to say, not even a heartbeat, just a flat EKG.
Anyways, guys, I've got a hard stop. Actually, I'm running into my next meeting. I don't know about the rest of you guys. We're now over the hour. I think this is an awesome discussion. I'm looking forward to more of these as this grows over the weeks. So we'll next week another couple demos and a technical discussion on the P2P stuff.
Fantastic.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Daniel.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Take care. Cheers, guys. Bye.